Are you ever going to leave, Carol? Stephen sneered, reclining on the sofa. His familiar blue eyes, once warm with love, now held nothing but contempt. My heart raced beneath my carefully composed exterior. 20 years of marriage, and this was what it had come to. The living room that had witnessed countless family Christmases and birthday celebrations now felt like an interrogation chamber. You heard him, Diane added, curling her lips into a cruel smile. Her perfectly manicured hand rested possessively on Stephen's shoulder. At 38, she was 14 years my junior, a fact she seemed determined to emphasize with every gesture. This house is too small for 3 adults. Too small, I replied evenly, though my voice quivered slightly. I took a deep breath to steady myself, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. And yet somehow you both managed to fit your affair in it. They smirked in unison, a synchronized display of callousness that made my stomach turn. The wedding photo on the mantel caught my eye, as Stephen and I on that sunny day in June, 2 decades ago. My fingers trembled slightly at my sides. You've got until tonight, Stephen said, checking his expensive watch, a gift from me on our 15th anniversary. Or we toss you out ourselves. I'll leave, I agreed, somehow managing to maintain my composure while inside I felt like I was shattering into 1,000 pieces. I met his gaze directly, summoning strength I didn't know I possessed. But I promise you'll regret it. Earlier that day had started as any other. I was in my home office, the space I'd carefully decorated over years to inspire creativity. I jumped on a Zoom call, sending off designs to a client who had been with me for nearly a decade. I had just wrapped up the presentation and closed my laptop when I heard the garage door open. Stephen was home early again. A knot formed in my stomach. This was the 3rd time this week he'd come home in the middle of the day. I sighed and went downstairs, my mind already swirling with the questions that had plagued me for weeks, questions I'd been too afraid to fully acknowledge. What's up with you coming home in the middle of the day so often? I asked, opening the fridge to prepare lunch. My hands moved mechanically, spreading mayo on bread while my mind raced with suspicions. Work's changed, Stephen said curtly, not meeting my eyes. He fiddled with his phone, angling it away from me. Taking on a new project with Diane, it's demanding. I paused, gripping a butter knife more tightly than necessary. Diane, huh? The name felt bitter on my tongue. You two seem to get along well. Stephen shrugged, his casual dismissal more painful than any argument. She's ambitious, knows what she wants. Unlike me, his unspoken words hung in the air. I remembered when he used to describe me that way, back when I was building my design business while raising Beth. Before I had put my career on the back burner to support his. I decided that today would be different. I'd find my proof. The suspicion had been gnawing at me for months, turning my nights sleepless and my days into anxious waiting. I waited until he left for another urgent meeting and went directly to his study. My heart pounded against my ribs as I entered the space that had once been off-limits by unspoken agreement. Our marriage had been built on trust, or so I'd thought. My fingers trembled as I rifled through his desk drawers, a sense of dread and determination propelling me forward. Then I found what I was looking for. There it was, a receipt for 2 at that swanky restaurant he claimed he could never afford to take me to, the one I'd hinted at for our anniversary last year. And another, a hotel receipt, room for 2, also in Diane's name. 20 years of memories flashed before my eyes, our wedding, Beth's birth, family vacations, all tarnished by these small pieces of paper. Just as I put the papers back, I heard the front door open. Stephen's voice, loud and carefree, floated through the hallway. A woman's laughter, Diane's, followed. My heart raced, fear and anger colliding within me. I barely had time to hide the evidence when they walked in. Well, look who's curious, Diane purred, leaning against the doorframe. Her presence in my home, the home where I'd raised my daughter, where I'd loved my husband, was like a cold slap to my face. Her designer outfit and confident stance made me suddenly aware of my faded jeans and messy ponytail. "What's the meaning of this?" I snapped, holding up the receipts. My voice sounded stronger than I felt, adrenaline masking the pain that threatened to overwhelm me. "Oh, those?" Stephen said nonchalantly, as if we were discussing the weather rather than the demolition of our marriage. He put his arm around Diane's waist. "Diane's moving in. There's no room for you anymore, Carol." My mind swirled with emotions: betrayal, rage, heartbreak, fear, a chaotic storm threatening to drown me. But I wouldn't let them see me fall apart. Years of handling difficult clients and raising a strong-willed daughter had taught me something about maintaining composure. I locked my feelings down immediately, though each beat of my heart felt like it would shatter my chest. I set down the receipts carefully on the desk and squared my shoulders. "You both can have your fun," I said calmly, stepping forward, though my legs felt like they might give way at any moment. "But let me assure you, it's going to cost you." "Like we care?" Diane laughed, linking arms with Stephen. The diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the light, identical to one Stephen had promised to buy me someday. "There's the door." I walked out without another word, my back straight, my steps measured. The weight of the betrayal tried to anchor me down, but I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Through sheer will, I made it up to the bedroom, our bedroom, where the king-size bed still held the indentation of two bodies that had once found solace in each other. I pulled out an old suitcase from the closet we'd shared for 2 decades and began to pack, each item a memory I wasn't ready to process. My phone buzzed. It was Beth, my daughter, checking in from college. I stared at her message for a beat, tears threatening to spill. My baby girl, who idolized her father. How would I tell her? I typed back briskly, "Everything's fine, see you soon." The lie tasted bitter, but I couldn't burden her with this during finals week. I picked up the phone again, but this time to make a call that would set my new plan in motion. Getting a junk removal service lined up for tomorrow without raising suspicion was crucial. As I moved through the house, removing traces of my life piece by piece, a realization settled in my bones: I wasn't just packing up my things. I was clearing space for something new, something stronger. The family photos that had once given me comfort now seemed like artifacts from a stranger's life. I paused at Beth's childhood bedroom, running my fingers along the growth marks we'd penciled on the doorframe. Stephen had been there for each measurement, his proud smile as consistent as the passing years. Had that been real? Or just another performance in his repertoire? My throat tightened at the thought. "Think she'll go quietly?" I overheard Diane ask Stephen downstairs, her voice floating up through the heating vent. "She'll be gone," Stephen assured her, confidence oozing from every syllable. "She knows better." I glanced at the framed family picture on the hallway table, the 3 of us smiling at Disney World, Beth between us with cotton candy and Mickey ears. My hands shook as I picked it up, seeing now what I hadn't seen then: Stephen's distant look, the space between us that had been growing for years. With one last look, I turned off the light and shut the door behind me. Resolute, their little game had just begun. The next morning, I woke up early and started packing my things discreetly. My body felt heavy with exhaustion after a night of fitful sleep, dreams haunted by Stephen's smirk and Diane's laughter. I knew they would be sleeping in, probably enjoying their little victory. 20 years of marriage, and I knew exactly how late Stephen liked to sleep on weekends. My hands moved quickly but quietly, drawer by drawer. I filled my suitcase with necessities, each item carrying memories I wasn't ready to examine. The silk scarf Stephen had brought back from Paris. The earrings from our 10th anniversary. I took one last look around our room. Stephen's cologne still lingered on the bedsheets, the scent that had once made me feel safe now turned my stomach. I shook my head, dismissing the sentiment. It was time to move on. My phone buzzed, and I answered quietly, stepping into the bathroom so my voice wouldn't carry. Yes, I need the junk removal service today, as soon as possible. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, stronger than I felt. Got it, ma'am, the voice on the other end confirmed. We'll be there in an hour. I headed to the kitchen to gather more things. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the breakfast nook where we'd shared thousands of family meals. I ran my fingers along the countertop I'd so carefully selected during our remodel 5 years ago. How proud I'd been of this house, this life we'd built together. As I wrapped up the last of my favorite coffee mugs in newspaper, I heard footsteps on the staircase. Stephen walked in, rubbing his eyes. His gray t-shirt, one I'd bought him, was wrinkled from sleep. He looked mildly surprised to see me, as if he'd already forgotten I existed. "Still here?" he asked, a hint of annoyance creeping into his voice. The same voice that had once whispered promises of forever. "Yes, but not for long," I replied coolly, continuing to pack a box. I noticed my hands were steady now, surprisingly so. "The removal service will be here soon." He snorted, pouring himself coffee from the pot I'd made. "Trying to make this dramatic, aren't you?" I didn't rise to the bait. "I'm just ensuring I don't leave anything behind," I said, not bothering to look at him. 20 years, and this is how it ends, I thought. With cardboard boxes and cold coffee. He returned upstairs, presumably to inform Diane. The silence he left behind felt deafening. I knew they wouldn't cause a scene while the removal crew was here. Stephen was too concerned with appearances for that. Moments later, a knock at the door announced their arrival. "Morning, ma'am, what needs to go?" the lead guy asked, glancing around at the well-appointed living room, his clipboard ready. "Everything," I replied steadily, surprised at the calm in my voice. "Every last piece that isn't nailed down." The team got to work, moving swiftly through the house. Young men in uniform lifting and carrying away pieces of my life, the armchair where I'd nursed Beth, the dining table where we'd celebrated 20 Thanksgivings. I busied myself with smaller items, directing them now and then, trying to ignore the hollow feeling expanding in my chest. From the corner of my eye, I saw Beth's photo on the mantel. Her high school graduation, her bright smile beaming at the camera, so proud in her cap and gown. Her eyes, Stephen's eyes, gave me strength. I tucked the photo safely into my handbag, away from the chaos around me. One of the team members gave me a sympathetic look. I didn't need their pity, I needed to stay focused. Stephen and Diane eventually parked themselves on the couch, watching the proceedings like hawks. Diane smirked at me, her arm possessively wrapped around Stephen's shoulder. She wore my house like a new outfit, already claiming territory. The sight of them on our couch, the one where Stephen and I had spent countless evenings watching movies with Beth, made my stomach clench. "Feels good to downsize, doesn't it?" she taunted, her voice honey-sweet but eyes cold as ice. I met her gaze calmly, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "We'll see who downsizes in the end," I replied, words laced with subtle promise. The confusion that flashed across her face gave me a small, momentary satisfaction. Once most of my belongings were packed up, I took a moment to send a message to Beth, updating her indirectly. My fingers hovered over the screen, uncertain how much to say. How do you tell your child that her family, as she knew it was over? Later that afternoon, after everything was loaded up, I left the house with a final glance. The home I'd poured my heart into for 2 decades, the walls that had witnessed Beth's first steps, my business growing from a dream to reality, all of it now tainted by betrayal. "See you around," I said to Stephen and Diane, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. Their laughter followed me to the driveway, but it didn't shake me. Not anymore. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, fighting back tears that demanded release. Not yet. Not until I was alone. At the hotel where I booked a room, I set my bags down and sat on the edge of the bed. The generic decor and impersonal space emphasized how adrift I suddenly was. 52 years old, and starting over. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. I took out my phone and dialed my lawyer, Mr. Green. We'd met at a charity function years ago, and though we weren't close, her reputation was stellar. It's Carol Taylor. I'd like to discuss my rights and next steps. My voice cracked slightly, the first real sign of my inner turmoil. Of course, Carol. I'm so sorry to hear this. Let's set up a meeting tomorrow, she replied, her tone compassionate but professional. We'll get through this together. I hung up and let out a long, shaky breath, finally allowing myself a moment of vulnerability. The weight of what had happened, what was still happening, pressed down on me. 20 years with Stephen, building a life, raising Beth, supporting his career while putting mine second. All of it now ending in a hotel room with beige walls and a view of the parking lot. Next, I dialed Beth. My beautiful, intelligent daughter who deserved better than to be caught in this mess. Her voice on the other end brought immediate comfort, a lifeline to the parts of my life still worth fighting for. Hey, Mom, you okay? Your text seemed weird. Always perceptive, my Beth. I'm fine, sweetie, I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. Just moving into a hotel for a while. Your dad and I were taking some space. The understatement of the century. I didn't want to worry you before your exams. Don't worry about me. There was a pause, then, is this about Dad and Diane? I've seen how he looks at her. My heart sank. Of course she'd noticed. Beth had always been observant, even as a child. We'll talk about it when you're home, okay? Focus on your finals. We'll get through this, Mom, Beth assured, wisdom beyond her 20 years. You're stronger than you think. As we talked, I felt a surge of determination rise within me, replacing some of the hurt. Beth's unwavering support reminded me that I wasn't alone, that parts of my life remained untouched by Stephen's betrayal. He and Diane thought they had me cornered, but they underestimated my resolve. With Beth's support and a few strategic moves, I knew they'd soon realize their mistake. Once off the call, I laid out a new plan on the hotel notepad, my designer's instinct for organization taking over. Tomorrow I'd consult with Ms. Green, start gathering evidence, and prepare for what was to come. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, the reality of my situation hitting me in waves. 20 years of marriage, and here I was, plotting its dismantling in a hotel room that smelled faintly of cleaning products and other people's lives. Tonight, however, was for rest and regrouping. I stood before the bathroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in months. The lines around my eyes seemed deeper, my skin paler. When had I started looking so tired? Had Stephen noticed? Had he stopped seeing me altogether? You are not defined by his betrayal, I whispered to my reflection, surprised by the fierceness in my voice. You were Carol Taylor before you were Carol Taylor Winters. The woman in the mirror looked uncertain but determined. The real battle would begin soon enough. The following morning, I met with Ms. Green. She was a sharp, seasoned lawyer in her 50s, with shrewd eyes and a reassuring presence. Her office, unlike the impersonal hotel room, felt solid and permanent, a place where problems got solved. Good to see you, Carol. Let's go over your options, she started, spreading out some paperwork. Her straightforward approach was exactly what I needed after the emotional chaos of the past days. I want to make sure I'm protected and that Stephen and Diane face consequences for what they've done, I said firmly, hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their slight tremor. The words Stephen and Diane still burned my tongue like acid. I understand completely, Ms. Green nodded, her eyes softening briefly. I went through something similar myself, years ago. It's painful, but you will get through this. She leaned forward, her expression turning professional again. We can start with a formal separation agreement to secure your rights and then consider divorce. Additionally, if you have any evidence of infidelity or financial misconduct, it will strengthen your case. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of grief and validation. I have some receipts and bank statements. I also suspect there's more if I dig deeper into his work files. The past months of suspicion had led me to pay more attention to Stephen's financial habits, noting discrepancies I'd previously overlooked. Ms. Green leaned forward, interested. That could be very useful. Document everything and make copies. We need to build a solid case. She tapped her pen against her legal pad. And Carol? Don't be afraid to fight for what you've helped build. 20 years is a significant investment. Leaving her office, I felt more empowered, but the work was just beginning. The bright spring day outside seemed at odds with the storm inside me. I found a quiet bench in a nearby park and called Beth. "Hey, Mom, how did it go?" she asked, concern evident in her voice despite the background noise of campus life. "Good, we have a plan." I watched a young couple walk by, their hands intertwined, and felt a pang of something between nostalgia and envy. "Can you check your dad's old laptop? The one in your dorm room? He might have left something incriminating." "Sure, I'll check tonight," Beth agreed without hesitation, loyalty clear in her voice. "And Mom? Stay strong. Dad doesn't deserve your tears." Her words, so mature and supportive, brought the sting of tears to my eyes. When had my little girl grown up enough to comfort me? "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered, my throat tight. I headed to a local cafe to start organizing the financial documents I'd managed to gather. The more I examined them, the clearer it became that Stephen had been hiding money, a lot of it. Bank transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, cash withdrawals that couldn't be explained by our normal expenses, credit card charges at jewelry stores, jewelry I'd never received. Each discovery was like a fresh cut, evidence of a deception that had been happening right under my nose while I was busy being a supportive wife. Every receipt for dinners I hadn't attended, hotel rooms I hadn't slept in, revealed not just his infidelity but his systematic dishonesty. I noted everything down, preparing for what was to come, my designer's eye for detail becoming a weapon in my arsenal. Later that evening, Beth called me back, her voice pitched with excitement and indignation. "Mom, I found something. Dad's been transferring large sums to an account I've never seen before. Must be offshore." Her psychology major's analytical mind had clearly been at work. "And there are emails, Mom, explicit ones between him and Diane. They've been planning this for months." "Great work, Beth," I said, a smile spreading across my face despite the pain of confirmation. "My daughter, my ally in this unexpected battle. We'll include that in our evidence." We arranged to meet the next day to go over everything she had found. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with the possibilities. The comfortable king-sized bed in the hotel felt enormous without Stephen's familiar presence beside me. I tossed and turned, haunted by memories of happier times, our honeymoon in Hawaii, Beth's first Christmas, family road trips where we'd sing along to old rock songs. Had all of it been a lie? Or had we simply grown apart, so gradually I hadn't noticed until it was too late? Early the next morning, I reached out to a moving company to help Beth pack up her things from the house. As they arrived at our old home, no, Stephen's home now, I watched from my car across the street, my heart pounding against my ribs. Stephen stormed out, his face flushed with anger, still wearing the robe I'd given him 2 Christmases ago. "What is all this?" he demanded, glaring at Beth and the movers. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. For a moment, I felt a twinge of satisfaction seeing him look less than perfect. "Just moving out what belongs to Mom and me," Beth replied calmly, her chin lifted in defiance. My brave girl, standing tall against her father's intimidation. "There's no place for our things here anymore, right?" Stephen fumed, running his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. You'll regret this, Beth. You don't understand what's happening here. I think you're the one who will regret everything, she shot back, not backing down. My chest swelled with pride at her strength, even as my heart broke that she had to face this confrontation. I watched from a distance, fighting the urge to rush in and protect her. But Beth didn't need protection, she was handling herself with a poise that belied her 20 years. Later, Beth met me at the hotel with her findings, her eyes bright with purpose despite the emotional toll. Look at this, Mom, she said, handing me printouts. Her hands, so much like my own, trembled slightly, the only sign of her inner turmoil. Dad's been funneling money through fake accounts, and Diane's been in on it. They're planning to use company funds for a house in Aspen. I scanned the documents, my resolve hardening. The familiar letterhead of Stephen's company topped emails discussing questionable financial practices. My designers I caught details others might miss, timestamps showing communications during our anniversary dinner, account numbers matching withdrawals from our joint savings. This was exactly what we needed. Excellent work, Beth, I said, squeezing her hand. Her fingers were cold in mine, reminding me that despite her maturity, this was hurting her too. We'll hand these over to Ms. Green first thing tomorrow. As we packed up the documents, I received a furious call from Stephen. The phone vibrated angrily in my hand, his name flashing on the screen, a name that once made my heart skip but now sent dread coursing through me. You took the furniture? He shouted without preamble, his voice echoing through the speaker. I can't even sit down in my own house. The absurdity of his complaint, after everything he'd done, almost made me laugh. I let him rant before replying, listening to his indignation with a strange detachment. Was this really the man I'd loved for 20 years? Should have thought of that before you betrayed me, Stephen, I finally said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. The word betrayal hung between us, heavy with 2 decades of broken promises. He spat a curse and hung up. Beth and I exchanged looks, both of us knowing we were just getting started. There was a strange intimacy in our shared pain and determination, a mother-daughter bond forged stronger in the fire of betrayal. Tomorrow, I'd consult with Ms. Green about the financial inconsistencies and prepare our next move. The weight of what lay ahead, divorce proceedings, division of assets, rebuilding my life, pressed down on me, but I felt more capable of bearing it with each passing hour. By evening, we had moved into a nearby hotel suite, more comfortable than my previous room and big enough for both of us. Beth stayed close, working with me to compile everything we needed. The calm before the storm allowed us to strengthen our bond and sharpen our focus. We ordered room service and really talked, about the future, about her studies, about my design business that I'd put on the back burner to support Stephen's career. You know, Mom, Beth said, curled up in an armchair with a cup of tea, I've always admired your designs. You could really build something amazing now. Her words touched something deep inside me, a long-dormant ambition that had been sacrificed on the altar of marriage and motherhood. Maybe I could, I replied, feeling a flicker of excitement amid the pain. As we settled in for the night, Beth turned to me with a determined look, her young face serious in the soft lamplight. We'll make them pay, Mom. They won't know what hit them. I nodded, feeling a fierce determination rise within me, replacing some of the heartache. Stephen and Diane thought they could walk all over us, but they'd soon learn the cost of betrayal. It was time to hit them where it hurt the most. The next morning, I woke up early to meet Ms. Green. The evidence Beth had found was pivotal, far more than I had expected. We presented everything, the financial transfers, the offshore account, and Diane's involvement. My hands trembled slightly as I laid out the documents, each page a testament to Stephen's betrayal. Ms. Green reviewed the documents with a steely expression, her experienced eyes catching details even I had missed. She paused at an email exchange between Stephen and Diane, dated 3 months ago, discussing how to handle Carol once their plan was in motion. "This is substantial, Carol," she said, looking up at me with something like admiration in her eyes. "We'll leverage this information to our advantage." "Good." I leaned forward, my voice unwavering despite the knot in my stomach. I want Stephen and Diane to feel the full weight of their actions. 20 years of my life deserved at least that much justice. Back at the hotel, Beth and I continued plotting our next steps. She had a psychology paper due but insisted on staying to help me. The desk in our suite was covered with financial statements and legal documents, the paper trail of a marriage's dissolution. Then my phone rang. It was Stephen, and he sounded panicked. The familiar ringtone, one I'd set years ago when things were good, now felt like a mockery. "What did you do with the furniture, Carol?" he demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Missing a comfy seat, Stephen?" My voice was calmer than I felt, a small victory. "Don't play games," he growled. "You know damn well we can't replace those things easily." There was a note of desperation beneath his anger that gave me a grim satisfaction. "Maybe we can strike a deal," I said, leaning into the opportunity, channeling the negotiation skills I'd used with difficult design clients over the years. "You wire $5,000 to my account, and I'll tell you where your precious chairs are." There was a long pause. I could almost see him weighing his options, his jaw clenched the way it always did when he felt cornered. "I'll think about it," he stammered before hanging up. Beth looked up from her laptop, a small smile playing on her lips. That got him rattled. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. "It's just the beginning. We'll hit them gradually." The strategy felt familiar, like designing a complex project, step by step. The following days were crucial. Stephen, foolishly desperate to get his things back, transferred the money, and I redirected it to cover the moving expenses. It wasn't about the money, it was about showing him that I wasn't the pushover he clearly thought I was. With that part of the dealings in motion, I sought the next strategic strike. The evidence of Stephen's financial improprieties at work was too significant to ignore. After discussing it with Ms. Green, I decided it was time to bring Johnson, Stephen's boss, into the picture. I called Stephen again, my heart beating faster despite my outward calm. "Thought about my offer?" His voice was cautious, wary. "All right," he said begrudgingly. "Send them back, but this better be everything." "Patience," I replied, the word sharp with 20 years of accumulated grievances. "Check your email for the address." After hanging up, I went back to compiling the last of our evidence, double-checking all the details, ready to send it off. Beth watched me from across the room, her young face solemn but supportive. "Are you sure about this next step, Mom? It's pretty nuclear." I paused, considering. Was I ready to potentially destroy Stephen's career along with our marriage? The man who had shared my bed, helped raise our daughter, been my partner for 2 decades? I thought of the receipts, the hotel rooms, the secret accounts, the calculated deception, and felt my resolve harden. "He made his choice," I said finally. "Now he deals with the consequences." I created an anonymous email and attached the files documenting Stephen's financial misdeeds for Johnson at work. "Mr. Johnson will have a field day with this," I muttered, hitting send. The action felt both terrible and liberating, like cutting off a limb to save the body. Within hours, chaos erupted. Stephen called back, his voice frantic, all traces of his usual confidence gone. My phone vibrated in my hand, his name flashing on the screen like a warning. "Carol, my boss wants to see me." "What did you do?" The panic in his voice was palpable, and I was surprised by the conflicting emotions it stirred in me, satisfaction, yes, but also a tinge of sorrow for what we had once been. "Oh, just ensured the right people got the right information," I replied coolly, though my heart raced. I twisted the wedding band I still wore out of habit. I made sure your reckless actions get the attention they deserve. You're playing with fire, he shouted, his voice breaking slightly. I could picture him pacing in his office, running his hand through his hair the way he always did when stressed, a gesture that had once made me want to comfort him. No, Stephen, I countered, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I'm controlling the blaze you started. 20 years of marriage, and here we were, enemies across a battlefield of betrayal. By the next morning, Johnson contacted me directly. His call came as I was having coffee with Beth in the hotel restaurant, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. Mrs. Taylor Winters, this is Robert Johnson. I'd like to discuss the information you sent. Could we meet at my office? I agreed, my stomach nodding with anticipation. I called Ms. Green immediately, and she insisted on accompanying me. Never walk into a situation like this without representation, she advised. As we entered Johnson's office later that day, I was struck by how formal the space felt, so different from the warm dinner parties Stephen and I had hosted for him and his wife over the years. Johnson greeted us solemnly, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by professional gravity. Mrs. Taylor Winters, thank you for coming. I'm disturbed by what I've reviewed. His eyes held a mixture of disappointment and anger, not directed at me, I realized, but at the situation Stephen had created. I straightened in my chair, smoothing down my carefully chosen outfit, a navy suit that Beth had helped me select for its professional appearance. I felt it was necessary for you to know what's been happening, I affirmed, my voice more confident than I felt. Ms. Green laid out the details methodically. The evidence was damning. Stephen and Diane had manipulated company finances, redirected funds, and violated numerous policies. As the information was presented, I watched Johnson's expression harden. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about corporate integrity and legal violations. We trust you understand the gravity, Ms. Green concluded. This affects more than just the Taylor Winters family. Johnson nodded, his fingers steepled in front of him. We'll conduct our investigation, but this looks serious. There will be severe consequences for both parties. Leaving the office, I felt a surge of satisfaction tinged with sadness. The lobby where I'd once waited for Stephen after company holiday parties now felt alien, as if it belonged to another life entirely. Beth hugged me outside, sharing the triumph. You did it, Mom, she whispered, her voice a blend of pride and relief. We did it, I corrected, returning her embrace, drawing strength from her support. 20 years of putting others first, and now I was fighting for myself, with my daughter by my side. As we walked to the car, Beth looked at me thoughtfully. What's our next step? Now we let the dominoes fall, I said confidently, though my heart raced at the thought of what was to come. And prepare for the fallout. Later that day, I received another frantic call from Stephen. The number I'd once answered eagerly now filled me with a complex mixture of emotions. What did you tell my boss? They've suspended me pending investigation. His voice was hoarse with panic, a far cry from the confident man who'd told me to leave my own home. Just the truth, I answered briskly, though my hand shook as I held the phone. The weight of what I'd set in motion pressed on my chest. You should have thought about the consequences. You're going to regret this, Carol. He threatened, but the hollow quality of his voice betrayed his fear. This wasn't the man I'd married, or perhaps it was, and I was only now seeing him clearly. No, Stephen, I replied, a strange calm settling over me despite the turmoil. This is just the beginning. You'll see. Hanging up, I turned to Beth, who had been watching me with concerned eyes. Her features, so like her father's, were set in determination, reminding me that not everything that came from my marriage was tainted. Get ready for the next phase, I told her, squeezing her hand. We've only just begun. With our plan in motion and the stakes growing higher, I knew Stephen and Diane were on the brink of facing what they had long evaded, accountability. Together, Beth and I had turned the tide, and now it was time to see how far we could go. The path ahead was uncertain, frightening even, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, not as Stephen's wife or Beth's mother, but as Carol Taylor, a woman reclaiming her power. A week later, I received an urgent call from Johnson. His normally measured voice had an edge of urgency that made my heart skip. "Mrs. Taylor Winters, can you come into the office today? We need to discuss your findings in detail," he said. "Of course, I'll be there shortly," I replied, already gathering the remaining evidence I'd planned to share. My hands trembled slightly as I collected the documents, printouts of emails, financial statements, timestamps of suspicious meetings. Each page represented another betrayal, another nail in the coffin of my marriage. Beth decided to come with me, eager to see justice in action. As we drove to Stephen's company, memories flooded back, holiday parties where I'd stood proudly by Stephen's side, the day he'd been promoted and we'd celebrated with champagne, the company picnics where Beth had played with other executives' children. All those moments now viewed through the lens of his deception. "Are you okay, Mom?" Beth asked, noticing my white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. "Yes," I said, releasing a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Just processing." As we entered the building, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. This was the tipping point. The receptionist, who had known me for years, couldn't quite meet my eyes as she directed us to the conference room. News had clearly spread. Johnson met us at the front, his face grave. He led us into a conference room where a few other stern-faced executives waited. The room where Stephen had given countless presentations, where he'd built his career while I supported from the sidelines, now felt like a courtroom. "Thank you for coming," Johnson began, his voice formal. "We've reviewed the initial evidence, but we need further clarification." I handed over the detailed documents I'd brought to financial transfers, incriminating emails, timestamps of meetings Stephen had claimed were work-related but were actually rendezvous with Diane. Ms. Green, who accompanied us, explained each piece methodically. "Stephen and Diane have been involved in fraudulent activities, transferring company funds and covering their tracks poorly. The offshore accounts are just the beginning," she said, her finger tracing the money trail across the documents. One executive, a woman I recognized from company functions but whose name escaped me, shook her head. "This is beyond unacceptable. Rest assured, Mrs. Taylor Winters, there will be severe repercussions." Beth leaned in, whispering, "They won't get away with this." Her voice held the righteous indignation of youth, untainted by the complex emotions that churned within me. As we laid out the final pieces, the executives grew more animated, their professional veneer cracking as they grasped the extent of the deception. 20 years I'd spent supporting Stephen's career, taking pride in his success, only to discover it had been built on dishonesty. "This has far-reaching implications," Johnson said, gathering the documents with careful hands. "We need to suspend Stephen and Diane immediately and launch a full investigation. The company may also press charges." The words "press charges" hung heavily in the air. Criminal charges. My heart stuttered at the thought. This was no longer about our marriage, it was about legal consequences that could change Stephen's life forever. For a moment, I felt a pang of doubt, of residual protective instinct for the man I'd loved for so long. Leaving the office, I felt a heavy weight lift even as a new one settled. We were finally turning the tide, but at what cost? The reality of what lay ahead, public exposure, legal proceedings, Beth caught in the middle, pressed down on me. Later that afternoon, Stephen called, his voice desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Gone was the confident executive, the man who'd smirked as he told me to leave our home. "They suspended me, Carol. They're investigating everything," he pleaded, fear making his voice crack. "You need to fix this." I stood by the hotel window, watching the city below continue its normal rhythm while my world remained in chaos. I won't fix your mess, Stephen, I replied coldly, though my heart ached at his distress despite everything. You brought this on yourself. Please, Carol, he begged, his voice breaking. Think about what this will do to Beth, to our family name. You should have thought about that before you betrayed me, I replied, ending the call as tears stung my eyes. 20 years of marriage, and he still thought he could manipulate me. Diane was on the line minutes later, her usual smooth confidence replaced by shrill panic. You treacherous bitch. Do you know what you've done? The venom in her voice was almost physical, as if it could reach through the phone to strike me. Yes, Diane, I said calmly, surprising myself with my composure. I made sure you face the consequences of your actions. You'll regret this. She threatened before hanging up. Beth and I spent the rest of the day finalizing our legal steps with Ms. Green, ensuring our case was airtight. The hotel room had become a war room, documents spread across every surface, legal strategies mapped out on notepads, our future plans step by careful step. Are you sure about this, Mom? Beth asked that evening, her young face serious in the soft lamplight. There's no going back. I looked at my daughter, so wise beyond her 20 years, so strong despite the pain of seeing her parents at war. I'm sure, I said, though my voice wavered slightly. Some things can't be forgiven. The next morning, news broke about Stephen and Diane's suspension. Their dirty laundry was now public, and the fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and acquaintances, some offering support, others fishing for gossip. I ignored most of them, focusing instead on the path ahead. We went to the office one more time to finalize our statements. The atmosphere was tense, the employees' curious glances following us as we walked to the conference room. My stomach knotted as we approached the door, knowing who waited inside. Stephen and Diane were there, looking defeated. Stephen sat slumped in his chair, his normally impeccable appearance disheveled, tie loosened, hair uncombed, dark circles under his eyes. Diane sat apart from him, her arms crossed defensively. The united front they'd presented in my home had crumbled under pressure. When Stephen saw me enter with Beth, something flickered in his eyes, desperation, regret, I couldn't be sure. He stood quickly, too quickly, knocking his chair backward. Carol, he said, his voice hoarse. Please, let's talk this through. We can find a way to settle this quietly. His hand reached toward me, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache, despite everything. I looked at this man, the father of my child, my partner of 20 years, and felt a confusing mixture of anger, pity, and residual affection. His blue eyes, the same ones that had looked at me with love on our wedding day, now pleaded for mercy. There's no quiet way out of this, Stephen, I replied, keeping my voice steady. The designer in me noticed how the conference room's sharp lines and cool colors matched the emotional temperature, clinical, unforgiving. You've lost all respect and integrity. Johnson stepped in, his presence commanding the room. Mr. Taylor Winters, Miss Phillips, the evidence is insurmountable. The company is pressing charges, and there will be civil suits as well. The word charges seemed to break something in Stephen. He turned on Diane, desperation in his eyes. This is all your fault. You pushed for this. Me? Diane shrieked, her perfectly maintained facade finally cracking completely. Her manicured finger jabbed the air between them. You were in it up to your neck. You told me the accounts were untraceable. You said it was foolproof. Stephen shot back, his voice rising to match hers. You said Carol would never figure it out. Their bickering filled the room, each trying to deflect blame. It was a symphony of desperation and guilt, two people who had conspired to hurt me now turning on each other to save themselves. Beth slipped her hand into mine, squeezing gently. The simple gesture grounded me, reminding me that regardless of what happened with Stephen, I hadn't lost everything. Finally, I faced them both, raising my voice to cut through their argument. Both of you underestimated me, thinking I'd just disappear quietly. But you gave me the fire I needed. The words came from somewhere deep inside, a strength I hadn't known I possessed until I was forced to find it. Stephen's face crumpled, and for a moment, I glimpsed the man I'd married, vulnerable, human. Carol, please, he whispered. 20 years. That has to count for something. I looked at him steadily, allowing myself to remember the good times, our wedding day, the birth of Beth, family vacations, quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and crosswords. Then I remembered the receipts, the hotel rooms, the secret accounts, the calculated deception spanning months, maybe years. It counted for something, I said quietly. But not enough for you, apparently. Leaving that office, I felt Beth's hand in mine, both of us stronger, united. We had faced them down and come out victorious. The spring sunshine outside seemed brighter somehow, as if the world itself was congratulating us. That night, we celebrated quietly, knowing the battle wasn't fully over but recognizing the milestone we had reached. Over dinner at a small Italian restaurant, the kind Stephen always considered too casual, Beth looked at me, her eyes shining with admiration. You did it, Mom. You stood your ground, and they paid for it. We did it, I corrected, raising my glass of wine toward her. The weight of the past week, the past months, really, seemed to lighten just a bit. Together. From that day forward, our focus shifted to rebuilding our lives, our home. With Ms. Green's help, I secured a favorable divorce settlement that recognized my contributions to Stephen's career. The company's legal action against Stephen and Diane would continue, but we had already won the greatest victory, reclaiming our dignity and strength. Stephen and Diane were summoned to the company's headquarters the next day. Word of their misdeeds had spread throughout the corporate world, and the atmosphere was thick with tension and anticipation. I decided to witness the spectacle in person, not out of vindictiveness, but to see the chapter close with my own eyes. Beth came with me, both of us blending into the background of the bustling corporate environment. The reception area where I'd waited so many times for Stephen, bringing him forgotten files or meeting him for lunch dates, now felt like a theater stage where the final act of our marriage would play out. We watched as Stephen and Diane were escorted into a large conference room where Johnson and several other executives awaited them. The glass walls offered little privacy, another irony not lost on me. The very transparency Stephen had evaded in our marriage was now forced upon him. The room fell silent as the door shut behind us. Johnson stood, a stack of papers in his hand, his face grave. I noticed the family photo he kept on his desk was turned down, a small gesture that spoke volumes about how he viewed Stephen now. Stephen, Diane, the evidence against you is overwhelming, embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of funds, Johnson announced, his voice echoing in the tense silence. We've begun a full audit, and preliminary findings are damning. Stephen's face flushed deep red, a vein pulsing at his temple, the same way it did during our worst arguments at home. This is absurd, he exploded, standing up so quickly his chair rolled backward. I demand to speak to someone higher up. Johnson remained calm, unmoved by the outburst. There's no higher up for you, Stephen. You've betrayed this company and its employees. His tone reminded me of how a parent might address a misbehaving child. Diane tried to interject, her voice trembling, all traces of her former confidence gone. Her designer outfit, likely purchased with stolen funds, couldn't disguise her fear. We can explain. There were extenuating circumstances. Save it, another executive cut in, a woman I recognized from company functions over the years. Her voice was icy, her expression unforgiving. We're pressing charges, and will ensure you're held accountable to the fullest extent. Stephen turned to Diane then, his eyes wild with panic and accusation. The united front they'd presented in my home had completely dissolved under pressure. You idiot, he hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. You were supposed to keep those records clean. I did everything you asked. Diane snapped back, moving away from him physically, as if to distance herself from his inevitable downfall. If you hadn't been so greedy. Their argument spiraled, loud enough to echo through the halls. Employees passing by slowed to witness the spectacle, the company's star executive and his ambitious paramour imploding in real time. Beth and I exchanged glances, both of us grimly satisfied, watching their public meltdown. This was the real Stephen, not the charming husband and father he pretended to be, but a man who would throw anyone under the bus to save himself. Another executive cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the display. Enough. You both will be escorted out and served with notice of termination and legal action. Stephen's demeanor shifted then, desperation taking over. His shoulders slumped, and the arrogance drained from his face. Please, he pleaded, his voice breaking, there must be something we can do to fix this. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. This was the man who'd held me through my father's funeral, who'd paced the hospital halls when Beth broke her arm at 7, who'd championed my design business in its early days. But that man was gone, or perhaps had never truly existed. Johnson's expression softened for a fraction of a second, but then he steeled himself. The time for fixing things is long past. You're a liability to this company and a disgrace to your positions. As Stephen and Diane were led out, heads hanging low, Beth and I quietly exited the building. Outside in the spring sunshine, she turned to me, her eyes glowing with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. That was intense, she said, linking her arm through mine. A gesture of solidarity that meant everything. Yes, but it was necessary, I replied, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. Freedom tasted sweet, even tinged with loss. They needed to face the consequences. We didn't have much time to reflect before the next phase of our plan kicked into gear. I coordinated with Ms. Green to finalize the divorce papers and ensure all our claims were solid. The story leaked to the press, and Stephen and Diane's personal and professional lives started to unravel at an accelerating pace. Reporters camped outside the home that was once mine, seeking comments on the scandal. Their reputations sank further with each passing day, each new revelation. Back at the hotel, Beth and I were inundated with calls from old friends and acquaintances, expressing their shock and support. It was heartening to know we were not alone in this, that others had seen through Stephen's facade or at least stood by me regardless. One evening, Beth looked up from her laptop, her expression serious. Mom, have you seen this? She showed me a news article detailing Diane's involvement in another company's scandal years ago, hinting at a pattern of unethical behavior. This will bury her, I said, forwarding the article to Johnson. Each new piece of information was another nail in the coffin of their deception. Every skeleton in their closets will come out now. That night, Stephen called again, but this time his voice was broken, almost unrecognizable. The confident man who had dismissed me from my own home was gone. Carol, please, can we talk? He begged, his words slightly slurred. I wondered if he'd been drinking. I've lost everything. I stood by the hotel window, looking out at the city lights. 20 years of memories played through my mind, the good and the bad, the truth and the lies. There's nothing left to talk about, Stephen, I said firmly, my heart steady despite the complexity of my feelings. You made your choices. Now live with them. The line went dead, and I felt an overwhelming sense of closure wash over me. Beth wrapped her arm around me, a silent gesture of support that said more than words could. We did it, Mom. They're facing everything they deserve. Yes, we did, I agreed, hugging her tightly, drawing strength from her presence. And it's finally over. As we prepared to move into our new home, a charming townhouse closer to Beth's university, there was a sense of renewed hope and strength between us. Stephen and Diane would continue to unravel in the public eye, facing legal consequences for their actions, but Beth and I were moving forward, stronger and undeniably triumphant. The future stretched before me, not as Stephen's wife or an extension of his success, but as Carol Taylor, designer, mother, survivor. For the first time in decades, I could hardly wait to see what came next. The news hit like a tidal wave. Stephen and Diane were officially arrested for embezzlement and fraud. Their mugshots splashed across the evening news, a stark contrast to the polished personas they'd flaunted at company parties and social gatherings. Beth and I watched the broadcast from our new living room, a sense of vindication washing over us as the reporter detailed the charges. "They're actually going to jail," Beth murmured, almost in disbelief. She sat cross-legged on our new couch, looking younger than her 20 years, more like the little girl who once believed her father hung the moon. "Justice has a way of catching up," I replied, feeling the weight of our struggle lifting. My voice sounded stronger, more confident than it had in years. The nightmare wasn't completely over, but we'd crossed a significant threshold. The following day, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a team of officials executing a court order to seize Stephen's assets. They moved with efficient precision, carting out electronics, valuable artworks, even his beloved vintage car, the one he'd spent countless weekends polishing while ignoring family time. The neighbor across the street watched with undisguised curiosity, her gardening forgotten as the drama unfolded. "This is just the beginning," one of the officers remarked to me as he catalogued items on his clipboard. "There's a lot more to account for." I nodded, stepping back inside our new home. The modest townhouse felt more like a home than our showcase mansion ever had. Beth looked up from her studies and smiled, her eyes bright with satisfaction and something else, relief, perhaps. "Mom, did you see that? They took the car." Her voice held a touch of vindictive pleasure that worried me slightly. This ordeal was leaving marks on all of us. "I saw, sweetheart." I sat beside her, gently closing her textbook. "It's all falling apart for them. But we need to focus on rebuilding, not rejoicing in their downfall." Even as I said it, I acknowledged the complicated satisfaction I felt. Healing would take time for both of us. A week later, we headed to the courtroom for the preliminary hearing. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and curious onlookers. I straightened my shoulders and held my head high, Beth's hand firmly in mine. Inside, the courtroom's solemn atmosphere made my heart race. Stephen and Diane sat at the defense table, looking disheveled and hollow-eyed, shadows of their former polished selves. Stephen's expensive suit hung loose on his frame, as if he'd lost weight rapidly. Diane sat as far from him as the defense table allowed, her designer outfit replaced by something subdued and appropriate. Their lawyers whispered urgent instructions, but the damage was already done. Ms. Green sat beside me, exuding calm confidence that helped steady my nerves. "This will be swift," she assured, patting my hand. "They don't have a leg to stand on." The judge read out the charges, his voice resonating through the hushed courtroom, detailing every egregious crime. Embezzlement, fraud, financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty. As the list grew longer, Stephen fidgeted in his seat, shooting desperate glances at Diane, who refused to meet his eyes. Beth squeezed my hand, offering silent support. The prosecutor presented our evidence methodically, each piece more damning than the last. When they showed the financial transfers to the offshore account, the ones Beth had discovered, the courtroom buzzed with disbelief. Stephen finally broke under the weight of the evidence, rising to his feet despite his lawyer's restraining hand. "It was all Diane's idea," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the woman he'd betrayed me for. "She orchestrated everything. She seduced me and manipulated me into this." "Liar!" Diane shrieked back, her composure shattering completely, her face contorted with rage. "You told me to do it. You said we'd never get caught." The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order in the court," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. He fixed both defendants with a stern glare. Your actions have consequences. Prepare for the full force of the law. Leaving the courthouse, Beth and I felt an incredible sense of liberation. Reporters called out questions, cameras flashed, but we walked straight ahead, heads high. This was the turning point. Their reality of facing the repercussions of their heinous actions had begun in earnest. How does it feel to see your ex-husband facing jail time? A reporter shouted as we reached the car. I paused, considering my words carefully. This isn't about feelings, I replied. It's about justice and accountability. In the ensuing weeks, Stephen and Diane were convicted, their sentences making headlines across the business world. The once powerful duo was now the cautionary tale of corporate ethics seminars and business school case studies. Beth and I focused on rebuilding our lives, day by day, piece by piece. Our new house felt lighter, filled with new memories and hopes. The walls we painted ourselves, the furniture we chose together, everything represented our fresh start. One evening over dinner, a simple homemade pasta that would have been too casual for Stephen's taste, Beth looked at me with a contented smile. We've come a long way, Mom. She twirled spaghetti around her fork thoughtfully. I'm proud of us. I'm proud of you too, Beth, I replied, my heart swelling with gratitude. Her support had been my anchor through the storm. You've been my rock through all this. As our lives began to stabilize, I received a surprising message from an old college friend who had heard about my ordeal. Lisa had been my roommate before I met Stephen, before I'd gradually lost touch with my own circle of friends. She invited me for coffee, a simple gesture that felt monumental. The cafe meeting was delightful, like stepping back into a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. We laughed about old times, shared updates on our lives, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the joy of genuine friendship without Stephen's shadow looming over the interaction. You know, Lisa said as we finished our second cups, I always thought you were meant for more than being Stephen's wife. Your design work was brilliant in college. Her words struck a chord. I'd allowed my own dreams and talents to become secondary to Stephen's career, his needs, his image. Maybe it's time to find out what else I can do, I replied, feeling a spark of excitement ignite. Returning home, Beth greeted me warmly. How was it? Wonderful, I said, hugging her. The smell of her familiar shampoo brought tears to my eyes, tears of gratitude, not sadness. We're finally moving forward. Stephen and Diane's trials were nearing their end, and the severe sentences they received cemented their fates as examples of consequences catching up with reckless actions. Watching the news report, Beth whispered, they got what they deserved. Yes, they did, I affirmed, without regret or malice. And we got our peace back. As we looked ahead, our bond stronger than ever, a sense of complete closure enveloped us. The storm had passed, leaving us clear skies and the promise of brighter days. I had lost a husband, but found myself in the process, and that, I realized, was the greater victory. With Stephen and Diane behind bars, life took on a new rhythm. Beth and I settled comfortably into our townhouse, making it truly ours with each personal touch, family photos, art we both loved, comfortable furniture chosen for enjoyment rather than status. Mornings were no longer filled with dread, but with the promise of new beginnings. The coffee tasted better, the sunshine seemed brighter, and the weight on my shoulders had lifted. I found solace in returning to my work as a graphic designer, delving into projects with renewed enthusiasm. The creative spark that had dimmed during my marriage blazed again, fueled by freedom and possibility. My home office became my sanctuary, a place where ideas flowed freely without Stephen's dismissive comments about my little hobby. One sunny morning as I sipped coffee on our small but charming porch, watching neighborhood children ride bikes to school, Beth joined me with her laptop. Her finals were over, and summer stretched before us, our first summer of true freedom. Mom, I've been thinking, she said, tucking her legs beneath her in the wicker chair. How about we start a small business together? We could combine our skills, your design expertise, and my marketing knowledge. I looked at her, surprised but intrigued. My daughter's face glowed with excitement, reminding me of when she was small and would propose grand adventures. That's a great idea, Beth. The possibility made my heart race with a feeling I'd almost forgotten: ambition. We could create something meaningful, something ours. She beamed, opening her laptop to show me a presentation she'd already prepared. I've been working on this concept. Look, Taylor Designs, reimagining spaces, rebuilding lives. We could focus on helping people like us, women starting over, needing to create new spaces that reflect their true selves. Her thoughtfulness moved me deeply. This wasn't just a business idea, it was a healing path for both of us. When did you get so wise? I asked, reaching over to squeeze her hand. I had a good teacher, she replied, her eyes, so like Stephen's in color but infinitely warmer, sparkling with affection. That evening turned into a planning session filled with laughter and creativity. We spread papers across the dining table, mapping out our venture, imagining a future untainted by past betrayals. The name we finally settled on, Resilient Designs, felt appropriate, encapsulating our journey and newfound strength. Days turned to weeks, and our visions slowly materialized. We registered the business, created a website, and reached out to potential clients through Lisa's connections. Each step forward was a victory, each challenge an opportunity to prove our resilience. Our first client was a woman in her 60s, recently widowed, wanting to transform the study her husband had dominated for 40 years into an art studio. As we helped her reimagine the space, I recognized the healing in her process, and in ours. We weren't just designing rooms, we were creating new beginnings. But one evening, as our business was gaining traction, a familiar name flashed on my phone. The ringtone I'd forgotten to change made my heart stutter. Picking it up, I heard an all too familiar voice, though now it was ragged with desperation. Carol? Diane sobbed, the confident perk completely gone from her voice. Please, you have to help me. I froze, Beth looking up from her sketches with alarm. What do you think you're doing calling me? I replied, anger bubbling up unexpectedly. I'd thought I was past this, that I'd processed all my feelings about the affair, the betrayal. Please, I'm scared, she cried, her voice breaking. Stephen's manipulating everyone in here, turning everyone against me. The other inmates, the guards, he's making my life hell. I took a deep breath, reminding myself how deep her betrayals ran, how she'd smirked in my home while wearing my husband's ring on her finger. You made your choices, Diane, I said, my voice steady despite the churning emotions. Now live with the consequences. She begged and pleaded, insisting she'd been manipulated by Stephen, that she'd never meant to hurt me. The same excuses, the same deflection of responsibility. I recognized the pattern now, saw through the manipulation that might once have swayed me. Ending the call, I felt a weight lift, another tie to the past severed cleanly. Beth walked over, sensing the tension radiating from me. Who was that? She asked, though I think she already knew. Diane, I said simply. She wanted help. I let her know she's on her own. She needs to face the reality she created. Beth nodded, hugging me tight. Good. She deserves it. Then, pulling back, she studied my face. Are you okay? I am, I replied, realizing with some surprise that it was true. Better than okay. Our business continued to grow, each success a reminder of how far we had come. We balanced work and life, cherishing the moments we spent together and with the new friends who entered our circle. One afternoon, in between client meetings, Beth brought up a topic I hadn't considered in years. Mom, have you thought about dating again? She asked gently, eyes twinkling with mischief. Mr. Gonzalez from the design store obviously has a crush on you. I laughed, feeling a blush warm my cheeks. Not really. It's been a long time. The thought was both terrifying and oddly appealing. But who knows, maybe someday. Beth smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear in a gesture that reminded me of when our roles were reversed, when I was the one offering comfort and wisdom. You deserve happiness, Mom. Don't close off the possibility. Her words stayed with me. A few weeks later, I decided to take a small step forward. I reconnected with Lisa and her circle of friends, finding joy in book clubs and art gallery openings. Slowly, the idea of dating began to feel less daunting, less like a betrayal of the woman I'd become. One evening, Beth set up an online profile for me, giggling as she chose pictures. Trust me, Mom. You're going to have a great time. Her enthusiasm was contagious. Reluctantly, I agreed to try. Soon, messages trickled in, and I found myself laughing at silly conversations with strangers who might become friends, or more. A coffee date here, a dinner there, nothing serious, but each interaction helped me reclaim parts of myself that had been dormant during my marriage. As my personal life expanded, so did Resilient Designs. We hired a small team, moved into a cozy little office in a renovated historic building, and watched our dreams flourish. Our clients appreciated our unique approach, often commenting on the passion and personal understanding we brought to each project. One day, as Beth and I closed up the office after a particularly successful client presentation, she turned to me, her eyes filled with pride and something else, contentment. Mom, we did it. We really turned everything around. Yes, we did, I said, embracing her, this beautiful, strong young woman who had stood by me through the darkest times. And the best part is, we did it together. Walking home through the park, we felt a deep sense of accomplishment and peace. The shadows of the past had faded, replaced by the light of our new beginnings. Stephen and Diane's betrayal had nearly broken me, but instead, it had revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. Each step forward was a testament to our resilience, proving that even amid life's worst storms, we could emerge stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. The future wasn't certain, nothing ever is, but for the first time in decades, uncertainty felt like an adventure rather than a threat. What do you think about expanding the business next year? Beth asked as we neared our home, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I smiled, linking my arm through hers. I think we can do anything we set our minds to. And in that moment, I knew it was true. Not because I was Stephen's ex-wife or Beth's mother, but because I was Carol Taylor, designer, entrepreneur, survivor, and finally, gloriously, myself. In a modern glass office building in Manhattan, New York, standing 35 floors tall, Carol Bradley stood facing a large window on the top floor. It was December 23 at 3 p.m. She silently watched as the falling snow transformed the usually bustling financial district into a quiet, silvery world. Her desk was buried underneath investment analysis reports and quarterly projections, the culmination of 25 years of dedicated work in the finance industry. The walls around her displayed numerous awards, silent testimonies to her expertise as one of the most respected senior analysts at the investment bank. Will this actually work tomorrow? She muttered to herself with a deep sigh, her usually confident expression wavering. Carol ran her fingers through her salt and pepper hair, feeling the weight of her 53 years. It had been 20 years since her father's passing. During those 2 decades, Carol had immersed herself in her work, climbing the corporate ladder while simultaneously supporting her family. Her annual income of $230,000 and carefully managed savings were proof of her disciplined life and professional success. A new notification appeared on her smartphone. It was the latest Instagram post from her younger brother, Michael, showing off a new Rolex with the caption "Life is great #luxurious living #happy family #new watch." Carol frowned, the lines around her eyes deepening. Her brother, 7 years her junior, had been squandering their father's inheritance as if it would last forever. His wife, Samantha, a former model with influencer aspirations, was cut from the same cloth, posting pictures of luxury brand bags and accessories almost daily. Her mother, Eleanor, and stepfather, Howard, a former university professor, also lived beyond their means in an upscale residence in Florida, primarily supported by Carol's financial assistance. Carol had received a call from her mother the night before, as usual, about money. "Carol, listen." Her mother's voice had that familiar saccharine tone that came out whenever she wanted something. "Michael needs to cover some expenses for his business. He's just having a temporary cash flow problem." "All right, I'll transfer it again," Carol responded, resignation evident in her voice. How many temporary problems had she funded over the years? 20 years of supporting her parents' comfortable lifestyle and bailing out her brother's failed business ventures. The pattern was so predictable it had become almost comforting in its familiarity. From her desk drawer, she took out a photo, the last Christmas with her father. The picture was taken in the hospital, and though he was frail, he had a warm smile. "Dad, I'm still trying," she whispered to the photo, feeling the familiar tightness in her throat. Her gaze shifted to a reservation confirmation next to it. The high-end resort in the Pocono Mountains, Skytop Lodge. She had booked 3 suites at $800 per night for the Christmas period, totaling about $10,000. It was a significant decision, even on her income. This trip wasn't just a family vacation for Carol, it was the last chance to mend her relationship with her family after decades of strained interactions. By bearing all costs and creating time to spend with the entire family, she hoped something might finally change between them. The office phone rang. It was a confirmation call from Skytop Lodge. They wanted to make final arrangements for her stay starting tomorrow. Carol straightened up, switching to her usual professional mode. "Yes, Carol Bradley speaking regarding tomorrow's reservation." While on the phone, Carol looked out the window again. It was a winter afternoon filled with mixed feelings of anticipation and anxiety. Inside her, a quiet voice whispered that perhaps this time things would be different, though experience suggested otherwise. At Carol's apartment, in the center of Carol's apartment, a well-used but quality suitcase lay half-packed. On the bed, a dark green cashmere sweater she planned to wear the next day was neatly folded. While not extravagantly expensive, its high-quality material and simple design reflected Carol's tastes and life philosophy: quality over flashiness, substance over appearance. "Is this the right thing to wear?" she murmured, holding the dark green sweater against her chest in front of the mirror. The reflection showed a woman whose face carried the lines of experience, framed by hair that had gradually transformed from dark brown to a distinguished mixture of silver and chestnut. Samantha always wore the latest designer brands, and her mother had grown to prefer flashy clothes to match Howard's pretentious tastes. Carol wondered, not for the first time, if her simple elegance would once again make her feel like an outsider in her own family. The phone rang. It was David. "How are the preparations coming along?" His voice carried its usual kindness tinged with concern. After 2 years of dating, he'd become attuned to the subtle shifts in her mood, especially when family was involved. "Yes, mostly done," Carol replied, sounding a bit tired. "I've given the staff at Skytop Lodge special instructions. I asked them to contact me immediately if anything happens." David Morrison was a respected real estate developer and resort owner in the U.S., and Skytop Lodge was one of his luxury properties. They had met at an investors' conference 2 years ago and had been building a steady relationship since, a relationship that offered Carol a kind of understanding and support she'd never experienced within her family. "Thank you, but it'll be okay," Carol continued as she walked towards the window, watching the snow continue to fall on the city streets below. "I believe this time will be different. This trip will change something. It has to." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears, but hope was a stubborn companion that refused to abandon her completely. After hanging up the phone, Carol sat down on the sofa in her living room. A photo of her last moment with her father was placed on the coffee table. It was 20 years ago, just before her father passed away in a white hospital room. Her emaciated father had gently held Carol's hand and said, "You're strong. You're the only one I can trust to take care of the family." Words that had shaped the last 2 decades of her life. With those words etched in her heart, Carol had worked relentlessly, graduated from college with excellent grades, and made her way up in the world of finance. She worked twice as hard as many of her colleagues and reached the position of senior analyst at an investment bank in her early 40s. Meanwhile, her brother, Michael, had dropped out of college following their father's death and, with the indulgence of his stepfather, continued to live off the inheritance and Carol's financial support. After his third marriage, to Samantha, they maintained a lifestyle that projected luxury on social media while masking a reality of debt and dependence. Carol's smartphone vibrated with a message from Michael, "You're picking me up tomorrow morning, right? Don't oversleep." His typically arrogant tone came through even in text. Carol briefly replied, "Of course." She had mixed feelings about using her own car for transportation. Typically, Michael used premium taxi services and hardly ever drove his own car, claiming that traffic in the city was too stressful for him. Looking at the clock, it was already past 10 p.m. She had to pick up her family early the next morning. Carol sighed deeply as she began to organize the rest of her luggage. Whether it was anticipation for tomorrow or anxiety, her heartbeat quickened slightly. Looking at her father's photo one last time, his smile seemed encouraging. "Tomorrow will surely go well," she murmured to herself as she headed to the bedroom, though the knot in her stomach suggested otherwise. The familiar blend of hope and dread would likely make for another night of fitful sleep. Christmas Eve morning. On Christmas Eve morning, Manhattan was enveloped in a silvery world of snow. The clock showed 6 a.m. Carol woke up before her alarm clock rang. "Today's the day," she said to herself as she took a deep breath and got out of bed. She had woken up 30 minutes earlier than planned, which was actually better. After 25 years in finance, punctuality was embedded in her DNA, and she wanted to be fully prepared before facing her family. In front of the large mirror in the bathroom, Carol carefully applied her makeup, taking extra time to conceal the shadows under her eyes from another night of interrupted sleep. Around her neck, she wore a single diamond necklace that was a keepsake from her father, simple, elegant, and charged with meaning. She straightened her collar and inspected her reflection once more. "As ready as I'll ever be," she whispered. The confidence she had cultivated over 53 years of life and the anxiety about the upcoming events subtly intertwined in the mirror's reflection. The underground parking garage of her well-maintained apartment building was quieter than usual. Most residents were probably still asleep on Christmas Eve morning. Carol's black Mercedes-Benz S550, a practical luxury she had allowed herself after her last promotion, gleamed under the garage lights. As she started the car, the navigation system displayed the route. The first destination was the upscale apartment on the Upper East Side where her mother and stepfather lived. From there, she would head to Michael and Samantha's new home in Brooklyn. The roads were clear, but careful driving was necessary due to the snow. When she arrived at the Upper East Side, her mother, Eleanor, was already waiting at the entrance of the apartment, dressed in a flashy red coat and holding a large Gucci bag that Carol recognized as a gift from last Christmas. Her stepfather, Howard, got into the back seat without a word, his academic demeanor a thin veneer over his perpetual displeasure. "Good morning, Carol." Her mother's voice had a contrived tone, as if greeting a high-end taxi driver rather than her daughter. "The traffic must have been terrible. We've been waiting in the cold." "I'm exactly on time, Mom," Carol replied evenly, checking her watch. "How are you both doing?" The question hung in the air, met only with Howard's grunt as he buried himself in his phone and Eleanor's dismissive wave. Next, they went to Michael and Samantha's house in Brooklyn. The couple had recently moved to an expensive area despite rumors that their financial situation was precarious, continuing to keep up appearances at all costs. "Carol, you're late." Michael's voice carried his usual arrogance as he and Samantha approached the car, their designer luggage in tow. "It's 8:05, Michael." "I said I'd be here by 8 o'clock, Carol replied, trying to keep her tone light despite the familiar irritation bubbling up. "Well, it's cold out here," Michael snapped, sliding into the passenger seat. Samantha was dressed in a new Gucci coat, holding a matching bag, her carefully made-up face set in practiced pleasantness. Both looked as if they had stepped out of a fashion magazine, though Carol knew the credit card bills behind that polished facade were likely mounting. With everyone aboard, Carol carefully took the wheel. Michael sat in the passenger seat, constantly fiddling with his smartphone, probably making another boastful post about their exclusive family getaway. The atmosphere inside the car was heavy. Apart from occasional whispers between Eleanor and Samantha, there was hardly any conversation directed at Carol. "So," Carol attempted after half an hour of strained silence, "I've heard the resort has excellent Christmas activities planned. There's a formal dinner tonight that I thought we could all attend together." We'll see," Michael replied without looking up from his phone. "Samantha and I might want to do our own thing. You know, meet some interesting people there." Carol's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I thought the point of this trip was to spend time together as a family." "Well, we are together," Eleanor interjected from the back seat. "In this car. 4 hours. Isn't that enough family time?" Howard let out a short laugh, the first sound he'd made since entering the car. Carol caught his smirk in the rearview mirror and felt something inside her sink a little further. After about 2 hours of driving, the snow-covered peaks of the Pocono Mountains came into view, breathtakingly beautiful against the clear blue sky. The sight eased some of Carol's tension, reminding her why she'd chosen this location. Perhaps the majesty of nature could inspire some genuine connection. "Ah, you can see it now," Michael suddenly exclaimed, finally looking up from his phone. The luxurious structure of Skytop Lodge appeared amidst the snowy landscape. The grand building, styled in Italian Renaissance, displayed a stunning harmony with the surrounding nature. A giant Christmas tree decorated the front entrance, and illuminations sparkled everywhere. Luxury cars arrived one after another, and wealthy families alighted, their excited voices carrying in the crisp winter air. When Carol parked the car in front of the entrance, a uniformed bellboy approached with a welcoming smile. From that moment, everything began to change. "You've worked hard to get us here," Michael's voice, icy cold, resonated inside the car. Carol twisted around to look at the back seat. There she saw her brother with a malicious smirk she had never seen before, though perhaps it had always been there, just below the surface. Her mother, Eleanor, and stepfather, Howard, averted their gazes, while Samantha gave a small, complicit smile. Carol instinctively felt that something was terribly wrong. "The driver's job ends here. This hotel is for us, the real family, only," Michael declared, the pretense of familial warmth completely dropped. Carol was momentarily stunned, feeling as though the temperature inside the car had plummeted. 20 years of supporting them, of trying to hold the family together, and this was their response. "What do you mean?" Carol's voice trembled slightly, more from the shock of such naked cruelty than from fear. "I made the reservations," she said, confusion mixing with the dawning realization of betrayal. "Oh, the reservations," Michael sneered. "They've already been changed, just to our names." Her mother looked troubled but said nothing, complicit in her silence. Her stepfather, Howard, continued to look out the window with studied indifference. Samantha did not bother to hide her malicious grin. Everyone except Carol got out of the car. Michael instructed the bellboy to take the luggage. Carol slowly took out her smartphone, consciously trying not to let her hands tremble, and pressed David's number. After a few rings, his calm voice came through. "Hello, Carol. David, cancel the reservations. Carol's voice maintained an unexpected calm, as if the years of suppressing her emotions had prepared her for this very moment. All of them, please. After a moment of silence on the other end, David seemed to understand the situation. Understood. I'll arrange it right away. At that moment, a staff member in uniform approached from the front desk. Against the backdrop of white snow, the black uniform stood out sharply. From inside the car, Carol watched the scene unfold as if it were happening to someone else. I'm sorry, we cannot find your reservation, the staff member informed them. The smile vanished from Michael's face. Eleanor began fumbling through her purse in a panic. Howard turned to face the front for the first time, his academic composure cracking. There must be some mistake. Eleanor's anxious muttering was audible through the partially open window. Carol slowly rolled down the car window completely. It's no mistake. Carol's voice was calm, though her heart was racing. All reservations have been cancelled. Goodbye. The words felt both foreign and liberating on her tongue. Carol, wait. Michael's voice carried a note of desperation. It's just a joke, you know that, right? Come on, sis. But Carol had already started the engine and grasped the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, she saw her family standing perplexed in the snow. Samantha's expensive boots sank into the snow as she gesticulated angrily. Carol heard Eleanor's plaintive voice fade with the wind as the car slowly exited the hotel parking lot and began retracing its path. The snow continued to fall, creating a veil between Carol and the life she was leaving behind. A single tear rolled down her cheek, followed by another and another. They weren't tears of sorrow, though there was a deep ache in her chest. They were tears of release, of 20 years of pent-up resentment and obligation finally breaking free. It's over, she whispered to herself, her voice breaking slightly. It's finally over. Leaving the resort, her smartphone began to ring. It was Michael calling. She ignored it. Then came a call from Eleanor. Ignored as well. Messages started arriving one after another. Why would you do this? It's Christmas Eve. You've embarrassed us in front of everyone. Will you refund the accommodation costs? Carol let out a small, bitter laugh at the last message. Even now, their concern was the money, not the relationship they had destroyed, not the years of her life she had given them. 20 years, she said aloud to the empty car. 20 years of giving everything I had, and it was never enough. The reality she had been avoiding for decades finally settled around her like the falling snow, clear, cold, and undeniable. As Carol drove down the mountain, heading towards the city, she decided not to go to her own apartment but instead to David's penthouse. She felt a refreshing sense of clarity reflecting from her expression in the rearview mirror. The burden she had carried for so long, her father's dying wish, her sense of responsibility, the guilt that had been carefully cultivated by her family, seemed to be lifting with each mile that separated her from Skytop Lodge. The street lights gently illuminated the falling snow, adding a peaceful glow to the festive evening. The quietness inside the car, devoid of any passengers in the back seat, was surprisingly comforting. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, Carol felt like she could breathe freely. 2 hours later, Carol's car slid into the underground parking garage of David's building. Stepping into the elevator, she felt a warm sensation spreading inside her chest. It was clear to her that she was headed to the right place, not just physically, but in her life's journey. When she opened the door to the penthouse, she was greeted by the warmth of the space and David's concerned presence. The fireplace was already lit, softly lighting up the living room with a golden glow. "Carol, are you okay?" David asked, his voice filled with genuine care. His lined face, with salt and pepper hair similar to her own, reflected a life fully lived and a capacity for empathy that Carol found increasingly precious. Yes, Carol smiled back, surprised to find that it wasn't a lie. Actually, I feel relieved. David quietly listened while preparing 2 glasses of wine as Carol shared everything: Michael's malicious smile, her mother Eleanor's evasive gaze, and the actions she herself had taken. The words poured out of her, decades of suppressed feelings finally finding their voice. "Carol, you made the right choice," David assured her as they sat on the sofa in front of the fireplace. His words carried the weight of someone who understood difficult family dynamics all too well. "But I ruined their Christmas because of me," Carol muttered, gazing at the wine glass in her hand, the old guilt making one last attempt to reassert itself. "That's not true," David's voice was gentle yet firm. "They ruined their own Christmas. You just protected your own worth." Tears welled up in Carol's eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. Instead, they were tears of relief from the burden she had carried for 20 years. Her smartphone vibrated again. This time it was a message from her stepfather: "Howard, because of your selfishness, you've embarrassed the entire family. Don't ever show your face again." Carol turned off her smartphone completely, feeling a strange sense of finality. David placed his hand on her shoulder, offering a warmth she had never felt from her family before. "From tomorrow, a new life begins," Carol declared, looking into the flames of the fireplace. "I won't let anyone interfere with my life anymore." David nodded silently, his presence a steady anchor in this sea of change. For Carol, this was the most meaningful Christmas Eve ever. She hadn't lost her family, she had reclaimed her true self. The keepsake necklace from her father softly glittered in the light of the fireplace, but for the first time, it felt like a connection to him rather than a chain tying her to a promise that had consumed her life. Christmas morning, on Christmas morning, Manhattan was enveloped in a silvery white world. The view from the windows of David's penthouse looked like a postcard, with snow continuing to fall gently between the high rises, softly covering up the events of the previous day. "Good morning," David greeted her as he was already making coffee. The aroma of espresso filled the room, mixing with the scent of pine from the small Christmas tree in the corner. "I got a call from Skytop Lodge this morning," David started quietly. "Your family made quite a scene." Standing by the window with a mug clutched in her hands, Carol responded calmly, "I expected as much. Michael must have caused a commotion." Turning on her smartphone, the screen was quickly filled with notifications: over 40 missed calls, nearly 100 messages. Most were from her mother, Eleanor, and her brother, Michael, with a few from Howard. "Carol, do you think this is acceptable? You've made us a laughingstock in the lobby of a luxury hotel, and I'll never forget it. How dare you treat us this way? What about tonight? Where are we supposed to go now?" The last message was from her mother: "We need to talk about money. Call me immediately." Carol sighed deeply and set the smartphone down. David hugged her from behind, his warmth reassuring. "I've made up my mind," Carol said, ready to face whatever came next, empowered and unburdened. Carol turned to look directly into David's eyes, her resolve clear. "I'm cutting off all ties with them," she declared firmly. David nodded silently, his expression showing full support for her decision. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently. "After all, they are your family." "No, they aren't," Carol replied with conviction, decades of clarity compressed into a few words. "A real family understands and supports each other. They were just strangers obsessed with money." The two moved to the breakfast table, where David had prepared croissants and scrambled eggs, a simple but heartfelt meal. This was the true happiness Carol had been seeking, not in grand gestures or expensive resorts, but in genuine connection and mutual respect. "I have a proposal for you, Carol," David said, looking earnestly at her. "Why don't we live together?" Carol was momentarily speechless. The snow quietly falling outside the window seemed to pause, suspending this moment in time. "Let's start a new life here together," David suggested, his words bringing tears to Carol's eyes, tears of joy from being freed from the false burdens of family and finding a new, true connection. "Yes," Carol smiled, "that sounds wonderful. Just then, her smartphone began to ring again. The screen displayed Mom, but Carol no longer hesitated. She picked up the phone and completely blocked her mother's number, followed by Michael's and Howard's. "I've taken a new step," Carol said with a clear and bright expression. David responded with a warm smile that reached his eyes. In that moment, Carol felt younger than she had in years, not because the lines on her face had disappeared, but because the weight on her heart had lifted, allowing her to stand straight and look forward instead of back. In mid-January, not long after the new year, Manhattan was hit by a severe cold wave. From the window of Carol's office, the cityscape seemed to shiver in the icy north wind. "Miss Bradley, there's a visitor for you in the lobby," her secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Eleanor Brown is here." Carol's hands paused above the keyboard. Eleanor Brown. It was the first time she'd heard her mother's name since that Christmas Eve. "Understood. I'll be right there," Carol replied, her voice trembling slightly. In the high-rise building's first-floor lobby, Carol's heels echoed on the marble floor as she prepared herself for the reunion with her mother. Her mother was sitting on the visitor's sofa, not in her usual flashy attire, but in a simple gray coat, her makeup subdued, clearly showing signs of fatigue. The sight of her mother looking older and more vulnerable than she remembered momentarily softened Carol's resolve. "May I come in?" Her mother's voice lacked its former arrogance. Carol nodded silently and led her mother to the elevator. Once they arrived at the office, Carol gestured for her mother to sit on the sofa in the reception area. Outside, light snow began to dance in the air, a reminder of that fateful day at Skytop Lodge. "I came here because I needed to talk," her mother started quietly, sitting across from Carol with a cup of coffee between them. "We've reached our limit." It was exactly as Carol had expected. Her father's inheritance was nearly depleted after years of extravagant living. Her stepfather's real estate investments had failed, and they were now burdened with debt. Michael was struggling to pay for his new car and was behind on rent. "We need help," her mother's voice shook. "Mom, is this about money?" Carol asked, her tone calm. "Yes," her mother continued hesitantly, "for the monthly living expenses, Michael's car loan, and—" "Mom, that's enough," Carol cut her off, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Mom, I'm no longer the family bank. I've chosen to live my own life." Her mother's expression clouded over, a stark contrast to the clear resolve in Carol's eyes. "But we're family." Eleanor's voice rose slightly, the familiar manipulation beginning to surface. "What does real family mean, anyway?" Carol asked quietly. "During Christmas, you all treated me like a chauffeur. You said nothing when Michael gave me that spiteful smile. Is that family?" A heavy silence filled the room. "Listen, Carol," her mother, Eleanor, said tearfully. "I truly regret what happened that day, but right now, I'm really in trouble. I need your help." Carol recognized the pattern, the tears, the appeal to family ties, the carefully crafted vulnerability that had worked so many times before. Carol slowly stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the view. The building that her father once managed could be seen in the distance, a reminder of where this all began. "Mom, go home," Carol said without turning around, "and don't come back again. My life is mine, not a resource for you and Michael to exploit. Goodbye, Mom." Her mother seemed to want to say more but ultimately stood up in silence. The sound of the door closing echoed in the room. Carol sighed deeply as she returned to her desk and touched her father's keepsake necklace. Strangely, something heavy inside her chest felt a bit lighter. "I kept my promise, Dad," she whispered. "I took care of them for 20 years. But now I need to take care of myself too." Spring epilogue. The arrival of spring had transformed the Manhattan scenery. From the window of David's penthouse, now their shared home, the park was alive with blossoms in full bloom. Carol held her morning coffee and gazed at the scene. Carol, what are you thinking about? David asked gently as he joined her by the window. Just a lot of things, Carol replied, turning to smile at him. In these 3 months, my life has changed so much. Indeed, the changes were significant. She had announced her engagement to David, and she had been promoted to head of her department at the investment bank. As the leader of a new project team, her talents were fully recognized. There had been no contact from her mother, and Michael's flashy social media posts had disappeared. Later, she heard from a colleague that they had moved from a luxury apartment to a modest one, now living a simpler life. Any regrets? David asked as he stood beside her, looking at the cherry blossoms that dotted the park below. None at all. This is the path I've chosen, Carol replied, touching her father's keepsake necklace. True family isn't necessarily about blood relations, Carol thought to herself. It's about understanding and supporting each other. At 53, she had finally learned that lesson, and though it had come later in life than she might have wished, she knew that there were still many good years ahead to live by that truth. At dusk, in a fancy restaurant where she had met David 2 years ago, he had important news. We're going to expand with a new hotel chain on the West Coast, David said happily, and I want you involved as an investment advisor. Carol nodded immediately, excited by the prospect of this new chapter. Work and private life, everything was coming into perfect balance, not because circumstances were perfect, but because she had found the courage to set boundaries and prioritize her own happiness. I have a feeling this is a new beginning for our lives, Carol raised her glass, the diamond necklace catching the light. Yes, our lives, David smiled, clinking his glass with hers. The chime sounded like the beginning of a new chapter, one that Carol would write on her own terms, with the wisdom of her 53 years and the freedom of a woman who had finally learned her own worth.